You, step back. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The words slid out like silk-gloved knives, quiet, elegant, and lethal. And they landed squarely on Zaire Bryant, the black security officer standing near the velvet rope. Every head turned, every heel froze mid-step. The moment sliced the room clean in half. Those who belonged, and her. All she'd done was reach out to gently guide a lost guest. A white influencer in a champagne dress had wandered off path, confused by the chaos of strobes and velvet aisles. Zaire, doing her job, had touched her elbow to redirect her. That was it. But it was enough to violate the invisible rules. "You're not here to mingle," said Marquess Leclerc, his voice now louder, smoother, meant for the room. "You're here to disappear, learn your place." The billionaire didn't look at Zaire again. He turned away, smoothing the cuff of his designer suit. Like she was a stain on it. Like she didn't even deserve a second glance. Phones rose, flashbulbs flared. Silence tensed the air like a held breath. Zaire didn't move, didn't cry, didn't flinch. But she turned, just slightly, and her eyes met the lens of a phone, held by someone halfway behind a champagne tower. And in that fraction of a second, someone hit record. Within 2 hours, the clip had crossed 1 million views. The caption read, "Billionaire humiliates black security woman for doing her job." It wasn't a statement, it was a spark. And the internet caught fire. But what the world didn't know, what Marquess certainly didn't know, was that Zaire wasn't just a security guard. She had a law scholarship once, a thesis, half-written, never submitted. A mother fired from a nursing job when Zaire was 19 for speaking out against a racist supervisor. Her life wasn't a failure, it was a detour, one that required silence, one that demanded strength in shadows. She didn't forget where she came from. She remembered everything, and when that video went viral, she didn't hide. She pulled out an old notebook, a law journal she'd once sworn never to open again. And she wrote just one sentence. "Power only wins when people forget what it did." Marcus thought it would pass. Just another PR hiccup. A news cycle flare-up. Something his assistants could bury in algorithms. But this time, the silence didn't collapse. It gathered. It gathered clicks and questions and context. It gathered voices. Women who had been stepped over. Workers who had been told to disappear. Lawsuits that were buried beneath NDAs. Apologies that never came. And at the center of that gathering was Zaire. She wasn't asking for an apology. She wasn't begging for attention. She was building something far more dangerous. A case, a movement, a mirror. Because when a black woman is told she doesn't belong, sometimes she stays quiet. But sometimes she answers with justice. Have you ever been made to feel invisible just because of your job, your background, or your skin? Share your story below. Because silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Security shifts didn't come with spotlights. Zaire's world, 6 days a week, was built on silence. Thick rubber soles, hushed radios, and quiet eyes watching everything without ever being seen. She knew every back hallway of the Lux Claw event pavilion, every hidden service entrance, every pressure point in the floor that creaked when the wrong heels hit it. She knew who smiled out of politeness and who gritted their teeth when speaking to someone wearing a name badge. And yet, for all that familiarity, she'd never belonged to the space she protected. The Lux Claw brand thrived on exclusivity. Its events were cathedrals of glass and arrogance. If you weren't dripping in designer or delivering champagne, you didn't exist. Still, Zaire did her job. She was early. She double-checked emergency exits. She offered help with quiet confidence. She remembered every face, not because she was nosy, but because she knew if something went wrong, no one else would. And then he arrived. Marquez Leclerc, the face of Lux Claw, billionaire at 37, son of a Caribbean tailor turned global fashion mogul, loved in press photos, feared in private hallways. To outsiders, he was representation done right, a black man who'd risen above the system and now ruled it. To insiders, he was a storm hidden behind polished glass. Zaire had only seen him twice before. Once during a rehearsal walkthrough, once backstage during a photo shoot when he refused to speak directly to the janitorial staff. He didn't have to scream to command. His silence cut cleaner. But tonight was different, because tonight Zaire had been placed at the front. VIP entrance, velvet ropes, camera range. It wasn't a promotion. It was coverage. Several staff had called out sick, and she was next in rotation. She adjusted her tie, tucked away her nerves, and told herself, "You're here to do a job, that's all." For the first hour, it went smoothly. She managed the flow of guests with ease. Quick nods, courteous gestures, calm efficiency, until the elbow touch, until the pause, until the room shifted. It happened so fast, and yet so slow. She remembered every second of it, as if her body had stepped out of time. And yet, even before Marquez humiliated her, there had been signs. The whisper of a designer assistant saying, "Keep her away from the step and repeat." The two influencers who laughed when Zaire politely asked them not to block the aisle. The uncomfortable glance from the blonde hostess who was technically supposed to be in charge. But let Zaire take the heat when things got tense. It was all part of the game, a game built on unspoken rules. Rule for 1, if you're black and in uniform, you're service, not presence. Rule number 2, you're welcome but not wanted. Rule number 3, don't forget rule number 1. Still Zaire followed protocol, held her posture, wore her silence like armor. But something had shifted in her the moment Marquez raised his voice in front of the cameras. Not the humiliation. She'd swallowed worse. It was the calculated nature of it. The performance. The smug certainty that no one would challenge him. That was the moment Zaire realized. This wasn't an accident. It was a warning, and not just for her. For everyone like her who dared to stand too close to the front. That night, she walked home with her badge still on, her tie slightly crooked, and a strange weight in her chest. She passed a bus stop where a girl, black, maybe 17, was watching the clip on her phone. Sound muted, eyes locked, the screen glowing Marcus's face. Zaire didn't stop. But she knew. This story wasn't just hers anymore. Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right, yet still not welcome? Zaire did. And what happened next wasn't in the manual. The ballroom was designed for spectacle. Gleaming marble floors, chandeliers dripping like frozen rain, and floral arrangements so perfectly manicured they looked airbrushed. Luxclaw didn't host parties. They staged perfection. There was no room for mistakes, and certainly no space for people like Zaire to be noticed. She didn't belong in any of it, but she had a job to do. 10 minutes before it happened, Zaire was managing a late surge of guests. Influencers arrived in clouds of perfume and practiced smiles. Tech investors brought their model girlfriends and scanned the room like it was the stock market. The staff bustled behind the scenes, coordinated chaos in all black uniforms, moving like a shadow army. It was loud, bright, chaotic. But Zaire kept her voice calm, her posture straight, and her eyes scanning. She reminded herself of the script: secure, assist, vanish. That's what they trained her to do. That's what she was good at. Then it happened. A woman in a champagne-colored dress, white, mid-30s, heavily followed on social media, broke from the crowd, veering into the wrong corridor. Zaire stepped forward. Calm. Professional. She gently touched the woman's elbow and guided her back toward the red carpet. That's it. No words exchanged, no scene made. But it was the moment Marquez chose to break her. He hadn't seen the gesture. But someone had whispered. Maybe an assistant. Maybe a stylist with something to prove. All it took was 4 words. She touched a guest, and Marquez turned. From the top of the stairs, he saw her, Zaire, his security officer, a black woman in uniform, standing beside a white guest. In front of cameras, his face didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. He descended the marble steps like gravity bowed to him. His shoes clicked with purpose, his eyes locked on her, and slowly, people parted. Like they always did. Zaire didn't move. She held her ground. But something inside her twisted. She saw it in his eyes before he spoke. Not surprise, not confusion. Intent. "Who told you to touch a guest?" Marquez said. It was ice. It was thunder. It cut through the string quartet like a guillotine. Photographers froze. Conversations halted. Glasses of champagne were mid-air, suspended by tension. Zaire's hand dropped to her side. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She had done everything by the book, but she understood. This wasn't about policy. It wasn't about propriety. It was about power. "You're not paid to interact," Marquez said, his voice louder now, savoring the attention. "You're here to stay invisible." It wasn't the volume that stung, it was the violation. She wasn't just being corrected, she was being erased. Behind her, she felt the other staff retreat. Not because they didn't care, but because they understood. When a man like Marquez targets you publicly, it's not discipline, it's performance. "She thinks this is her stage," he continued, now facing the room like a director in full monologue. "Someone remind her what her badge says." Somewhere in the crowd, a nervous chuckle broke free. A woman looked away. A man adjusted his tie. Zaire couldn't breathe. But she didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She didn't run. She turned her eyes toward him. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Something calmer. A kind of focus that unsettled him. And then, it cracked. From the back left of the crowd, a voice rang out. "She was helping! You're the one making a scene!" It wasn't loud, but it was enough. A ripple in the surface of the perfect evening. The kind of ripple that doesn't fade. It spreads. A beat of silence. Then, click, a phone went up. Then another. Someone whispered, "Are you filming this?" Then came the flash, and Zaire stood there, still, silent, composed. She realized then, this wasn't humiliation. This was documentation. Marquez had expected to break her, to turn her into a warning, to reaffirm the hierarchy on his terms. But instead he had handed her proof, and as the phones kept rising, Zaire's mind flashed back. Not to earlier that day, but to 7 years ago. To the hospital hallway. Her mother, nurse supervisor for 15 years, being cornered by a surgeon in a pressed white coat. "You don't get to challenge my orders," he'd said. "You're here to take care of the bedpans, not question medicine." Her mother didn't yell, didn't fight. She folded her name badge, placed it gently on the nurse's station, and walked away. Zaire had watched from a chair nearby. Just 19. Just out of breath. And she remembered thinking, one day I won't walk away. Back in the ballroom, the murmurs grew louder. Marquez turned. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure. He tugged at his cufflink. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted, not just to Zaire, but to the phones, the eyes, the doubt spreading like smoke in silk. Zaire didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because this wasn't about argument. It was about what the world had just witnessed. And it was only the beginning. Have you ever done everything right, followed every rule, only to be punished anyway? Zaire didn't break protocol. She broke a system of silence. And now, the whole world was watching. It didn't explode right away. There were no headlines, no urgent sirens, no dramatic takedowns. The damage spread quietly, like a crack in a glass sculpture, starting small, invisible, until everything shattered without warning. Zaire wasn't fired that night. She finished her shift. She stood tall. She nodded where protocol required, but she knew. The moment Marquez turned away, when the lenses turned elsewhere, a door had silently closed. The next morning, her phone stayed silent. No texts, no schedule updates, no incident reports. No one from HR called. No one from management emailed. No one said, "You're suspended." But everyone knew she was removed. And in that silence was a sentence. Zaire told no one. She didn't post. She didn't reply to the hundreds of comments pouring in beneath the viral clip. She handled it like a queen. Marcus is done. That stare? That's the stare of someone who remembers. Each line felt like a stone thrown into a lake already disturbed. But Zaire felt no satisfaction. No justice. Only numbness. She wasn't rising. She was falling. Falling inward. She lay curled on her old sofa, the soft flicker of phone light beside her. Some were calling her the face of resistance on Twitter. But to Zaire, she felt like a file someone else now owned. What she lost wasn't just a job. It was control. She no longer owned her story. 3 days later, she went to the laundromat. The owner, a Haitian woman in her 50s, looked at her with a strange softness. "You're Zaire, right? The girl from the video?" Zaire froze. "What video?" The woman didn't push. She just nodded slowly, then handed her the folded shirt. "My son watched that clip 10 times. He asked, 'Why do they hate her, Mom?'" Zaire said nothing. She had no answer. That night, Zaire opened her laptop. Not to scroll, to search. She typed, "Systemic retaliation in corporate power structures." The file was still there. Her unfinished thesis, 50 pages, never submitted. The final chapter was titled, "When Punishment Comes Through Silence." She reread it, line by line. When a system wants to punish you, it doesn't raise its hand. It just stops speaking your name. Zaire stared at the words like they were someone else's memories. Was this her final chapter? The next morning, a plain envelope arrived. No return address, no name, just one handwritten line. "I used to work for Marquez. He won't stop. But I kept everything. If you're ready," inside a USB drive. Zaire didn't know who sent it. She wasn't sure if she wanted to open it. But she did. Inside, an audio file. A closed-door PR meeting. Marcus' voice. Calm. Clear. "If we humiliate her just enough, the internet will eat her alive. We don't have to fire her. We just make her disappear." Zaire sat still. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. Instead, a clarity settled in. Not rage, not fear. Recognition. This wasn't about her. This was about what he had always done. What the system had always allowed. That afternoon, she put on her hoodie. Jeans, headphones. She didn't pack anything dramatic. No posters, no signs. She just walked. Not as a victim, not even as a fighter, but as a witness. As she passed the subway, a group of teens were huddled around a phone. A black boy, maybe 14, said, "She should sue. She didn't even do anything wrong." Zaire paused, just for a breath. She didn't correct him, didn't step in, but she heard him, and more than that. She remembered what it meant to be seen, not for your mistake, but for your presence. She kept walking, but this time, not as someone fading, as someone forming. Have you ever been punished by silence, like the world just stopped saying your name? Zaire lived it, and what she did next changed everything. Zaire never told anyone what happened in room 217. Not her friends, not her professors, not even herself, not out loud. But it was the day everything changed. Back then, she was 19, a law student with a full scholarship, and too many books to carry in one trip. She worked part-time delivering meals in the hospital where her mother, Evelyn Bryant, had been a respected head nurse for over a decade. Evelyn was known for her efficiency, her sharp instincts, and her refusal to play politics. She didn't gossip. She didn't bow. She kept the floor running like a war room. Clean, fast, organized. And maybe that's why they hated her. The patient in room 217 was a wealthy donor's father. Terminal, belligerent, and deeply uncomfortable with having a black nurse anywhere near his bed. One afternoon, as Zaire passed by with a meal tray, she heard it, the yelling, the slur, then the silence. She peeked into the room and saw her mother standing still, jaw clenched, hands behind her back. Across from her stood Dr. Landers, the attending physician, arms crossed, face unreadable. "If you want to keep your job," he said, "I suggest you learn not to escalate situations with sensitive families." Evelyn didn't shout. She didn't cry. She only said, "So now being black is called escalating?" Zaire remembered how the doctor didn't answer. He just turned, walked out. And Evelyn? She reached for her badge, clipped it from her uniform, placed it gently on the nurse's station desk. Then she turned to Zaire, who had frozen in the hallway. "Remember this," she said. "They won't fire you for being right. They'll erase you for making them uncomfortable." Zaire hadn't recalled that moment in years. But after hearing Marcus's voice on the USB, the memory returned with full force. Everything made sense now. This wasn't just about Marcus, or the job, or that night on the red carpet. It was generational, systemic, rotten from root to fruit. And this time she would not disappear. That night, she called someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Amira Patel, her former roommate in law school, now working at a grassroots legal non-profit. They hadn't kept in touch after Zaire left school. No drama, just distance. But Amira picked up on the second ring. "Zaire?" A pause. Then, "Tell me everything." They met the next day at a small coffee shop near Harlem. No makeup, no microphones, just two women at a table, the weight of old dreams and new wounds between them. Zaire didn't begin with the video. She began with her mother, with room 217, with what it means to stand still when the world tells you to shrink. Amira listened, carefully, quietly. Then she opened her laptop. "You're not going to vanish," she said, "and this isn't just a complaint, it's a case." That same week, a young intern at LuxClaw, someone Zaire barely knew, sent her a secure email. No subject, no message, just a file. Video footage from the staff-only internal security feed, date-stamped, unedited, with full audio. It showed the exact moment Marcus approached her. You could hear every word, see every expression, feel the atmosphere shift. Most importantly, you could prove it was intentional. Zaire sat at her kitchen table, laptop open. Video paused at the moment her eyes met the camera. She thought of Evelyn, of Amira, of the boy at the subway who said, "She didn't even do anything wrong." And for the first time in weeks, Zaire smiled. Not in triumph, but in certainty, because the memory she thought was just a buried scar had become proof. And the next move was entirely hers. Have you ever watched the same injustice play out again and again and whispered to yourself, "Not this time"? Zaire did. And now, it was no longer a memory. It was a case. It was a line drawn. Some people fight with fists, some with fire. Zaire, she fought with facts, the kind that didn't tremble when repeated. The kind that made lawyers sit straighter in their chairs, She printed the footage, transcribed the audio, indexed every timestamp where Marquez's voice rose above policy and fell into arrogance. And then she built the board. It was a cork board from the dollar store, taped with yellowed articles, outlines, and pushpins connecting quotes to outcomes. On one side, her mother's resignation. The email from the hospital never apologizing, justifying the realignment of personnel for patient comfort. On the other, Marquez's quotes, his PR strategy notes, the anonymous USB, the intern's security footage, the viral clip, the public reaction. She wasn't just collecting receipts. She was building a structure. Amira came over every evening after work. "You sure you don't want a bigger team?" she asked once. Zaire shook her head. "Not yet. I want them to underestimate us first." They worked out of Zaire's kitchen. 2 laptops, endless tea, legal pads stacked with notes and highlighted precedent cases. They weren't filing a harassment claim. They weren't asking for reinstatement. They were going after patterned retaliation, a lawsuit that would expose internal practices at LuxClaw, link the behavior to boardroom strategy, and force discovery on years of silenced exits and ghosted employees. Zaire didn't want headlines. She wanted systemic exposure. She wanted every executive to wonder, what did I write in that Slack message 3 years ago? Still, even with the planning, fear lingered. It crept in at 2:37 a.m. when the screens dimmed and her brain refused to shut off. What if they lose? What if they bury it all? What if they make her the villain? One night, she told Amira, "I'm not sure I'm built for war." Amira looked up from her files. "You're not. That's why you'll win. You're not going to burn the system down. You're going to make them explain it, under oath." 2 weeks later, Zaire got a letter. Official letterhead. Legal counsel from LuxClaw. A warning, thinly veiled as a reminder of confidentiality and conduct. Zaire didn't flinch. She scanned it, saved it, then added it to the cork board, under the heading. They're paying attention now. The next morning, Marcus's face appeared on a podcast. He laughed lightly when asked about the incident. "Oh, the security moment. We've resolved it internally. I believe in accountability, but I also believe in moving forward." No apology, no acknowledgement, no ownership. Zaire paused the video. Then she opened a new document on her desktop. Title, Motion for Preliminary Injunction. That week they filed. The lawsuit was public, precise, undeniable. Marcus hadn't expected it to come from her. A woman who once stood quietly by a velvet rope. He had forgotten, or never realized, what happens when someone decides not to stay small. As news began to circulate, Zaire kept her routine. She didn't do press. She didn't go viral again. She went to the gym. She bought groceries. She read every court response with a red pen. She let the internet argue. She focused on the facts. But something changed. One afternoon, outside the courthouse, a janitor stopped her. He looked down, then back up. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" "For not folding." Zaire nodded, walked on, and in her head one sentence replayed, "You don't fight to be seen. You fight so no one else has to fight this alone again." Have you ever decided quietly that enough is enough? Zaire didn't set out to be a symbol. She just stopped shrinking. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. The hearing wasn't supposed to be public. It was just a procedural motion, a request for early injunction, barely enough to fill a courtroom on a Wednesday morning. But when Zaire arrived, the line was already wrapped around the building. Law students, activists, people she didn't know, but who knew her. Phones were out. Whispers followed her through the metal detector. "That's her. She's the one from the clip. I heard she's representing herself." She wasn't. Amira was lead counsel. A full legal team had joined now. But the image of Zaire as the silent woman behind the velvet rope, now walking through marble columns with purpose, was too strong to let go. She stepped into the courtroom like she belonged. Because she did. Marcus didn't look at her at first. He came in through the side entrance, surrounded by lawyers, suit-pressed, sunglasses still on. He shook a few hands, nodded at the judge, smirked once at the cameras. But when he sat and finally glanced her way, Zaire didn't blink. Their eyes met for less than a second. Long enough. The hearing began. It wasn't a trial, no witness box, no jury, but it was still war. Amira stood, spoke calmly, confidently. Your Honor, this is not about emotion. This is about pattern. This is about silence used as a tool of erasure. And this is about the cost of being inconvenient to power. The judge nodded. The defense objected. The usual rhythm of legal theater. Then came the footage, played on court screens. Angle 1, the public video. Angle 2, the internal camera. Clear. Undeniable. Zaire sat still. She didn't watch Marcus. She watched the judge. And for the first time, she saw him shift. A pen paused. A brow furrowed. A foot tapped harder than before. Then came the audio. The PR recording. We don't need to fire her. Just make her want to leave. Let the internet finish the job. Someone in the back of the courtroom gasped. The judge didn't react. But the room did. Even silence can tremble. The defense scrambled, filed a request to dismiss based on inadmissible context, claimed privacy violation, tried to stall. But the motion didn't go through, because something had changed. Zaire could feel it. Not a victory, but a fracture, a pressure point cracking open. Outside, press waited like wolves. Reporters waved. Cameras flashed. Zaire kept walking. But then, one question stopped her. A young journalist asked, "Do you think this changes anything?" Zaire looked at her, then looked past her, at the people watching from sidewalks, across the street, behind phones. It already has. But later that night, when the adrenaline faded and the headlines went quiet, Zaire sat alone at her kitchen table, and her hands shook. Because the truth is, you can win a battle and still feel broken. The system hadn't fallen. Marcus hadn't been held accountable, not yet. All she'd done was crack the glass, and somewhere in her bones she feared what might come next. Then came the call. Blocked number, no voicemail. She let it go. But it came again and again, until she finally picked up. A voice, cold, flat, spoke 4 words. "Stop, or we escalate." Then silence. Zaire didn't scream, didn't panic. She stood up, pulled the blinds closed, locked her door. Then she sat back down and opened her notebook. On the last page, she wrote, "When they threaten you in the dark, it means you've finally lit something they're afraid of." Have you ever touched something powerful, just enough to crack it, and wondered what might come through the break? Zaire touched it. And now something's moving behind the wall. The final hearing was set for a Friday. A storm was coming. Literal and otherwise. The sky above the courthouse was slate gray, thick with clouds, thick with questions. Zaire didn't wear anything symbolic. No statement tee, no power heels, just a black suit. Clean, quiet. The fight wasn't about the outfit. It was about who had the truth. Inside, the gallery was full. Reporters, lawyers, people who hadn't attended a single hearing but suddenly wanted front-row seats to see how it would all fall apart, or fall into place. Marcus was already seated when Zaire entered. He didn't smile. She didn't look. The judge called the room to order. This wasn't a trial, yet, but it felt like one. The air held weight. Zaire watched Amira rise. She spoke with precision. What happened here isn't unique. It's a system responding exactly the way it was designed to. Protect power, punish disruption, and erase anyone who breaks the choreography. Then she paused, clicked the final exhibit into place. A timeline. Dates, exits, patterns. One by one, every staff member who had disappeared after raising a flag. Every email. Every confidential resolution. And then, Zaire's name at the end, not as a footnote, as the final data point, the line that broke the trend. The defense stood dismissive, polished, called it coincidence. Unrelated events, isolated missteps. But their voice didn't shake the room like it used to. The silence felt like resistance now, not submission. Then the judge asked if Zaire wanted to speak. It wasn't expected, it wasn't required. But she stood, not loud, not theatrical, just clear. You tried to make me smaller, not with what you said, but with what you removed. Schedules, emails, hours, the space I used to take up, the silence that surrounded it. She paused, no notes, just breath. But silence works both ways. It can erase, or it can echo. And in that moment, she wasn't the girl in uniform. She was the voice they couldn't mute. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he'd review the record, revisit precedent, consider broader implications. That was fine, because something had already broken. And it wasn't Zaire. Outside, the wind had picked up. People gathered near the steps. A woman held a cardboard sign. I was erased too. A man wore a pin that read, "You're not invisible." Zaire didn't stop for interviews. She didn't raise a fist. She just walked down the steps, slow, solid, unmoved, until her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "My sister was fired after reporting abuse. We have documents, ready to talk." She stared at the screen, then looked up, at the sky, still heavy but trying to clear. And she understood. This wasn't the end of the fight. This was just the moment they stopped pretending it didn't exist. She didn't win everything, but she changed the story. Not with fury, not with fire, with proof. Have you ever stood in a room that tried to make you disappear and realized you were the loudest thing in it? Zaire did. And now, she's no longer the only one speaking.